And get started. My name is Amanda Stickelbauer. I'm the project manager for SC Economics and also a classroom teacher at Blythewood High School. I teach all things economics from AP Micro to regular level economics and every once in a while some history course. But thank you guys for being flexible, because I know that today we kind of did a little switcheroo because we had a conflict with one of our presenters, but we have graciously asked and Mike accepted to present to us on the U.S. and German trade relationship and the German apprenticeship model, which is very much in line with what you would have heard if you had signed up for the other webinar as well. So these are very much complementary goods, I think. Thank you again for being on here with us today. Just to give you guys a little reminder, Mike will give his presentation and he will take some intermittent questions between the lessons and at the end. We also are providing our teachers who attend 5 live webinars during this summer series of 10 an incentive to earn $100 for attending 5 and completing the evaluations at the end of each. So please make sure at the end that you hold on, and I will shoot out the link to the evaluation in the chat. Very simple, just want to know what went well, what we can improve on in the future. We always love to hear from our teachers. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Raymer, the Executive Director of the Georgia Council on Economic Education and a top consultant. We are super happy to be able to partner with the Georgia Council because many of the councils around do wonderful things, and in the purest form of economics, we like to take advantage of others' comparative advantage and share it with others in trade. So Mike, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and I am thrilled to be back. I'm hoping some of you were here 2 weeks ago with the first presentation I did. And Amanda, if you could invite me when the guy I switch with, when his presentation is, if you send a reminder, I'd love to come see that. Because I think, as you said, it's going to be a nice piggyback on what I'm talking about today, and how you know, Germany and apprenticeship programs are in South Carolina and what impact that's having on workers in your state. With me is Chris Cannon. There he is right there. Chris is the Associate Director here at the Georgia Council, and he's going to be running sort of some of the interactive behind the scene things as we go. He'll also be checking the chat box. If you do have questions about my presentation or the lessons that we're going to do today, you put them in there. Chris will spot them along the way, and then kind of at halftime, we'll take a break and Chris will ask, you know, the questions if you have any. You know, I'm hoping that those of you who came to the first presentation I did 2 weeks ago have gone to the top website and looked at some of the materials and learned a little bit more about the Transatlantic Outreach Program. Because I just talked a lot about the Transatlantic Outreach Program 2 weeks ago, I'm not going to spend a ton of time today going through all of that again. I will say, if you're new, if you've not seen a presentation from me this summer, Amanda mentioned that I'm a Transatlantic Outreach Program consultant. And if you're not familiar with the Transatlantic Outreach Program, it's an organization in Washington, D.C. They provide educators with classroom materials, workshops, virtual exchanges, and study tours to Germany. There's a website which we'll link at the very end of this presentation, which Amanda will email your way when we're done. Their website's there. If you've never visited their website, please do so. There's a lot of great materials at no financial charge to you. And again, the opportunity to involve yourself in virtual exchanges with teachers and students in Germany. And then you yourself can apply to go for an all expense paid trip to Germany. The next time they're going to do it would be next summer. This summer it's not happening because of COVID. Today, we're going to look at 2 different lessons that the Transatlantic Outreach Program had produced recently. One is Inquiry 5.2, Made in Germany, and the second one's in Inquiry 5.3, the German Apprenticeship Model. And I am going to be touching on many parts of each of the lessons. You know, they're full-blown, you know, class-long lesson plans that, you know, because of time, we don't have time to go through every single step. But I'm going to touch on the highlights and sort of hopefully show you that these would be beneficial in your classroom for students. And again, you can get them at no financial charge and use them when you see fit. I'm just going to move my screen here a little bit. All right, so the main questions we're going to go over today, and I will answer by the end of the hour. The first lesson, we're going to talk about which goods and services does Germany export to the U.S. and why does the U.S. import goods from Germany? And, you know, living in South Carolina, you know, the great BMW connection. So a lot of this you probably already know, but this might be another approach to it that gets your students kind of hooked into this in your classroom. The second lesson is going to be talking about the dual vocational education and training program, or VET. And we're going to look at what it is and what are the benefits and drawbacks of this system, both in Germany and here in the United States. And the big sort of economic concepts here that we're going to be looking at within these lessons: benefits of trade, imports, exports. Amanda mentioned comparative advantages. There's that in the first lesson. And then lastly, investing in human capital, and why that's so important for you know, citizens of South Carolina or Georgia or wherever it might be, and how that relates to German companies throughout the world. Okay. So some quick, fast facts that I just want to share with you, and I would hope that you would share with your students before you dive into lessons about Germany. And you can read through these too, obviously, but Germany was the 5th largest trading partner with the US in 2019. They exported $111 billion worth of goods and services to the US in 2019, huge number. We exported $61 billion worth of our goods and services to Germany in 2019. And globally, Germany has the 4th largest global economy. It's the 3rd largest global exporter after China and the United States. And hugely important, they are the largest market in the EU, and they've been that way for a while. They are definitely sort of the leader of the EU in a number of different ways, and probably the biggest way is economically. The German economy over the last 20 or so years has been doing very well. And you know, there's a lot of reasons for that, and we're going to touch on some of those things as we go through here. Some South Carolina fast facts, linking it to where you are, and you'll see at the bottom of the screen underneath your state flag, there's that link. If you're wondering where I got these numbers, there's an article from the Greenville Business Magazine that's where these come from. But as it says, there's more than 200 German companies doing business in South Carolina, which is pretty amazing. German companies, those companies support more than 40,000 jobs in your state. Your state exported 3.7 billion to Germany in goods, which is 11% of your overall exports in 2018. And you can see the last point there, about 1/3 of all foreign direct investment and almost half of jobs created by foreign direct investment in South Carolina are because of Germany. So, you know, much of that, again, starts with BMW, but it's more than just BMW. So Germany is really, really super important to South Carolina. And here are some numbers to kind of highlight that and show that. Okay, so what I want you to do, and I should have said this at the very top, if you don't have a piece of paper and a pen, something to write, just brief notes on, it doesn't have to be a giant piece of paper, but just something to write some things down, because there's going to be a couple different times during the day where I'm going to ask you to just jot down a couple things, and it's going to start with this one. The first part of this lesson really talks about, you know, which goods are coming to the United States from Germany. So what I want to do is I want to look at what we, the United States, is purchasing from Germany and why it's those particular kinds of goods. Okay. So this first little activity, I've got listed 10 different goods that are coming from Germany, from arts and antiques all the way down to vehicle parts. What I would like you to do on your piece of paper with your pen is make 2 columns. On the left, you've got top 5. On the right, you've got bottom 5. And all I want you to do at this point is write down the top 5 things that you think come from Germany out of that list. So the 5 are going to one side, and then the things that are on the bottom 5 where you're thinking, we probably don't get a lot of that from Germany, put those to the right under bottom 5. So I'll give you 2 minutes to do that. So again, top 5 on the left, bottom 5 on the right. And then we'll look at our answers here in 2 minutes. Chris, cue the Jeopardy music that we don't have ready to cue.
I should have had it ready. That's my bad.
Maybe some German music. Some Scorpions. All right, we got 1 more minute. And I apologize, the lighting in my office, I was saying earlier that it's kind of stormy, cloudy looking, and the sun's coming out, going back and forth. So sometimes it's bright, sometimes it's dark. I apologize. Okay, so with that, I think that's probably enough time. So I want to share with you the answers to this. So the top five goods we get from Germany and the United States, cars and automobiles, probably not a surprise to anybody. I think, again, being in South Carolina, BMW, that's probably on your mind quite a bit. We get a lot of medicine, which is called packaged medicaments, which we'll refer to in a second. We get machinery from Germany, medical instruments, and vehicle parts. All right, the bottom five, arts and antique, clothing, paper goods, plastic toys, televisions, right? We're not getting those things from Germany. So the question for your students after they do this kind of activity is, why is it that the United States we're importing these kind of goods from Germany, kind of high-end, expensive, technological goods versus something like plastic toys or paper goods that you don't need as much to actually produce, right? And this is where you can take the lesson into comparative advantage, talking about Germany's, what's Germany really good at? Where are their lowest opportunity costs? Why are they making cars and automobiles and medicine and machinery? And you can get into the whole educational system, which we will do at the end of this, and talk about, the German workers are being trained to do these really highly technical things and skills that produce goods that we want from that country. Versus, a country like Myanmar, they're not really there yet where they can produce quality automobiles or quality vehicle parts because their economy is just not to the point where they've grown and they're making plastic toys or paper goods or something like that. Okay. So again, this is just a quick way to get the discussion going in your classroom where we're talking about actual goods coming from Germany. During my last presentation, I actually listed a number of German companies and I had their logos up. But this is something you could also do with students. Ask them, can you think of German companies or German products? And I'm pretty certain that they're going to come up with a long list of things from Germany. Especially, their Adidas or Pumas they're wearing on their feet or something like that. They might know that off the top of their head, but they're probably going to know a lot of automakers as well. All right, so what I would like you to do here is I'm going to, in a second, change my screen and take you to this website. And so right now on your scrap paper, if you could write down that web link, and then in a second, we're going to go there and we're going to examine this OEC website, the Observatory of Economic Complexity, which if you've never visited, it's one of those websites where you get into it and it's really cool. And you're like, gee, pretty soon, 3 hours later, you're still digging around, finding information for your class. I really, really love this. There's great information for you, for students, and it's presented in a nice way as well.
Mike, they can also click on it in the chat box.
Okay, there you go. Thank you, Chris. All right, so with that said, I'm going to shift my screen and go to, I gotta move this.
And while Mike is pulling that up, if you do click on it in the chat box, keep this web browser open because we are also going to use it later for something else.
Okay, so when you get to the website, this is the page you're going to see, and there's a page like this for every country in the world. Basically, I've pulled up Germany because we're talking about Germany, but you can see all kinds of data in here with a great about section. If you see a term, you're like, I don't know what that is. What does that mean? Generally, you can click on a little link and it'll explain and define what that particular term is or terms. So this is a really comprehensive, great way to look at global trade. And what we're going to do again is just look at Germany and the world, and then more specifically Germany and the United States. So in a second, what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you find the actual percentages of those top 5 goods that come from Germany to the United States. So ultimately, what you are going to do is you're going to scroll down just a little bit on your screen to this section called product trade and product exports, right? And this is all of the global trade Germany is doing with the entire world. And on your right over here, you've got each of the top color here. These are all European countries. Anything in red is Asia, blue is North America. You can see they're color coded. There's the United States. And then over here on the left, these are the actual goods that Germany is exporting to the rest of the world. You've got the big one being cars, and then you can whittle down, and each little box tells you specifically what they're doing in the numbers. So if you're looking at global trade, Germany and the whole world, you can see 10.3% of all of their exports are cars, vehicle parts, medicine, all these different things over here. All right. What I want you to do is find the information for the United States specifically. So all I'm going to ask you to do is click on the United States, and you click it. Sometimes takes a second or two to change this box on the left, which I just did on mine. So you can see mine changing now. So now the information exports just to the United States, okay? So if you would, click on that United States tab, get into the exports, and then for the top 5 items that you ranked, if you would, find the percentages of those top 5 things, please, and just jot them on your paper. Again, I'll give you, a minute or two to do that. Okay. Other things to look at before we go back. If you keep scrolling down this page, you'll see monthly trade data. And again, it could be Germany, US, or Germany with the whole world. Market growth. The part we're looking at is a free website, but you can actually register and pay and get sort of deeper into this if you want. But you can see that there's plenty of information for you and your students to look at. If you're trying to get your students to interpret charts and graphs, great charts and graphs here that are moving around every day, basically. So there's a lot of really great ways to show your students data. So again, if you get nothing else out of today, hopefully you'll get a lot out of it today, but this website is a really fantastic source that you can use in your classroom, virtual classroom or in person, whatever you guys decide to do when school starts back up, okay? All right, so you've found those numbers, and I'm gonna go back to my home page here. Okay. So what we've done here is we filled in the numbers, and you can see, a little more than 16% of all exports from Germany to the United States. That's my phone ringing, I'm sorry. Are automobiles, all the way down, medicine, vehicle parts, medical instruments, machinery. You can see the numbers there. And again, try to get your students thinking about and talking about why is it that it's these kind of items coming from Germany versus clothing, paper products, low cost kinds of simple things to make. And again, it comes back to Germany's economy. It's very advanced like ours, and they have highly skilled workers that are making really highly qualified, high quality products that we as Americans want to buy. That's another key part of this, okay? All right, so speaking of that, I wanna talk about why it is that we in the United States import goods from Germany, okay? So I wanna do a hypothetical little activity here where imagine if tomorrow a new rule comes out that says you have to get rid of whatever vehicle you're driving now. It's no longer able to be on the road. And you have to purchase one of these 3 vehicles, right? These are the only 3 vehicles that are going to be sold in the United States going forward. You got a Mitsubishi, you got a Dodge, and you got a Chrysler. It comes in those colors. That's all you have, okay? So what I'm going to ask you to do, each of you, is I'm going to ask you to select one, just based on what you see there. That's the only information you have. So number 1, you're going to select one. Number 2, you're going to assign a score to it between 1 and 5. If you think your vehicle is a 5, that means this is the best thing I've ever seen. I am happy, I'm thrilled. Yay, my Dodge, or yay, my Chrysler, or yay, my Mitsubishi. If you're not happy with it, you give it a 1, right? And all your other scores are somewhere in between. So that's your second direction. The third thing I'm going to have you do in the chat box, once you've made your selection and you've given it a score, I'm going to have each of you type in Dodge 2 or Chrysler 1 or Mitsubishi 5, whatever it might be. So go ahead, make a selection. And then again, just in the chat box, what did you pick? What's the score? Go ahead. And I'll be watching the chat box. Chris, do you know, I'm not seeing the chat box. Is it only on your screen?
No, you since you're sharing your screen, it's probably up at the top. You should see a little orange thing somewhere because you should be getting a lot of messages. It's you have
Usually
to
I
hover
do.
over like view options or something like that, or the little 3-dot hamburger thing.
Not seeing it this time. What are you seeing in the chat box, Chris? Are they coming in?
Yeah, there's lots of 2s and 3s, a couple of 2.5s, quite a few 4s actually. A lot of people are quite happy with that Chrysler.
Real customers weren't. I think they stopped making them.
Yeah, I think they did too. Yeah, Chrysler, a lot of 3. Yeah, very few 5s. Several 1s. Dodge 1, Mitsubishi 1. Amanda says she's negative. Few Mitsubishi fans out there. A couple of 5 Mitsubishi.
All right, fine. All right.
But very few 5s. I can probably count like 5 5s out of the whole thing. It's mostly 2s and 3s.
Okay. All right. So again, if we had time, we could average this out. Chris, if you had to guess of an average, just whipping through that really quickly, what do you think they average?
Probably 2.5 to 3.
All right, 2.5 to 3.
Maybe a little like 3.25 maybe.
Especially when you take in Amanda's negative number into account.
Yes, correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. So that was yesterday. So we go down a couple months, and a lot of Americans are not so happy because they have like 2 or 3 happiness level. So we start, grumbling and asking and pushing for more selections. So a month from now, we learn that, okay, things have changed, and now we have the ability to purchase these cars in addition to the first 3. Okay. So we got a Volkswagen, a Porsche, an Audi, a BMW, and a Mercedes-Benz, assuming we can afford these things. Same thing. I'm going to have you select one, whatever one you want. You get 1 of 5 to pick from there. Rank your happiness level 1 to 5, 5 being the happiest, 1 being the least happy. And then the same thing, type your vehicle selected and ranking number into the chat bar now. All right, so go ahead and pick one of these.
The first 6 responses were all BMW 5s. There's a Mercedes 4, BMW 5, Mercedes 5, any of them 5, says Jennifer Davis.
Okay.
P5, Audi 5, Volkswagen 5, BMW 5, lots of 5s, Mike.
Okay, cool.
There's a 3, a Volkswagen 2.
Oh, are any negative scores on this one?
No negatives on this one.
Okay. I'm still not seeing my chat box. It's very bizarre. It's totally gone.
Yeah, it's when you share your screen, it goes to a different place. We should work on that.
Okay, so
all 4s. I'm not all. I'm sorry. There's 1 3, 1 2, and then the rest are 4s and 5s. So my average on this would be like 4.25, something like that.
Okay, all right, sounds good.
It's higher.
Oh, it is higher. That's what I thought it would be. Last thing with the chat box for this part. So we've done 2 rankings. I want you to, the last time in this particular round, type the word happier into the chat if you were happier after round 2 compared to round 1. Type less happy into the chat if you were less happy after round 2 compared to round 1. And then Chris, if you could tell me what they're saying in this chat box.
Yeah, so far it's a universally happier. Somebody says total utility rises. That was Amanda Stickelbauer. Happier with all caps and an exclamation point.
Okay. Now,
universally happier.
We all know that when you do this with students, there'll probably be that one kid who'll put less happy just to be that one kid. But for the most part, I knew when putting this together, I knew what the answer would be. Because within this lesson, there's actually a trade simulation that simulates something like this, where you do multiple rounds. And if you've never done it before, basically it tells you to, you can either buy a number of different little items that, some are better than others, and there's enough for everyone in the class. You do a round of trading where the students are limited to 3 or 4 people in a group. The second round, you open it up to more people. The third round, you open it up to the entire classroom where the students are they have the ability to go around and trade with anyone in the classroom. And I've done that lesson hundreds of times with teachers and students when I used to be a teacher, and it worked every single time. So when the question at the beginning is, why are we trading with Germany? The simple answers are, well, they make really high quality products, right? And the second part is they make really high quality products that we want, that make us happier. How do I know that? You just told me that if you could buy that German vehicle compared to the other three, you'd be happier, right? So again, when you get this, when we're done here today and you go in and actually look at the lessons, be sure to do the trade simulation part of this when you're in person. I thought of ways to try to simulate this a little bit more virtually, and I timing wise, I just couldn't think of something that was as effective as it is in the classroom. So as you see on the bottom of the screen there, seriously, do the trade simulation because it's really, really outstanding. And it's going to work for you, okay? So next thing I want to talk about before we finish this particular lesson, there's a third part of the lesson that gets into trade agreements. And I'm not going to touch on it much here, but basically my last presentation, we talked about tariffs and how that might slow down trade with the BMW factory. And the third part of this lesson gets into trade agreements and those kinds of things. So if you've already done the lesson that we talked about last time, this sort of supplements that. And you can again talk about how it's important to have quality trade agreements with other countries that allows for trade. Because again, if we don't have a good trade agreement with Germany, maybe it's harder for you to buy one of those 5 cars that you saw that you really wanted to buy, because something like a tariff might make it super expensive and sort of out of your price range kind of thing. So that's the third part of that lesson. The kind of performance task that's listed in this lesson at the end, and again, I think this is really great in your state versus even Georgia, is that, what's the significance of Germany's trade relationship with the United States / South Carolina, or if you want to get more specific with your students in your county, because there might be a company or two, German companies in your county that you live. So I think this lends itself very nicely to your state and all the citizens of your state, where they can bring in the German companies that we talked about like 5 slides ago, and how there's 40,000 South Carolinians working for German companies. They can also talk about the $60 billion in exports that we're sending to Germany each year, and how important that is. All right, so there's, with this particular lesson, when I taught in the classroom, generally this for me would be like a day-long, 50-minute, even a block, hour and a half kind of lesson to get students talking about the importance of trade and using Germany as the sort of the model of trade with a country and how important it is to the United States. Do you have any questions at this point about this lesson? And again, if you don't have them now, we can ask them at the end, or you can certainly email me later. But the lesson itself is going to be linked at the bottom, at the tail end of this particular presentation, and you can go there and download it for free. There's no financial charge. Everything's just in one spot where you can download it, all the materials. Any questions coming in, Chris? Nope. Okay. Okay. So let's move on to our next bit of the presentation, and we're going to talk about the German apprenticeship model. Again, something that I think is really fits well in South Carolina, because South Carolina is leading the nation in having apprenticeship programs and apprenticeship opportunities for students in your state. The German apprenticeship model, if you've never learned anything about it or read about it, really is sort of the model for the world to bring students together with companies at a young age to teach them a skill, so that when they graduate from high school, they're like ready to work in a company and do something highly skilled that pays a pretty good wage. Here in the United States, apprenticeship models are starting to make a little bit of a comeback kind of vocational programs that we have in some schools. But you'll see here in a second that the German model is just a little bit different and oftentimes a little deeper than what we have in the United States. So a question to start this section off for each of you is, how did you learn to teach? Okay, so again, I guess you could chat, you could type some answers in the chat box, keep them brief, but if you think back to when you decided to be a teacher, how did you actually learn how to do it, right? So if you could write down a sentence maybe, how did you learn to teach?
First response in is watching other teachers.
Okay.
David Ivey says by doing it.
Mm-hmm.
On the job, trial by fire.
Yes.
For master teachers, trial and error. Being in the classroom, listening to students, learn by doing, student teaching, trial and error, ditto.
I would have to agree. Yeah, I mean, all those answers, I would say yes to them. I was a second career teacher. I came back into the classroom when I was getting, in my education courses in college. We talked about teaching. We learned about, theory and methods and all that kind of stuff. But until I actually stood in front of a group of ninth graders, that's what did it for me, right? Because I could talk about it all day long and read about it all day long, but I had to actually get in there and do it. And, I think back to my first year of teaching, and if I run into a student of mine who I taught in 1999/2000, I apologize to them. And I say to them, I was really bad. I'm sorry. I wish you could come back and see me when I was 10 years in, because I got a lot better over the years, right? So like you guys were saying, I learned by doing it. And that's what this whole German vocational program is all about, right? That they get students actually doing hands-on learning from a master, as they call it, or a Meister in Germany. They learn by doing, okay? And one thing you're going to see here in a second is this learn by doing, and what students can actually do at a young age is quite different in our country versus in Germany, okay? So what we're going to do on this slide, and Chris is going to take you to a website here in a second. What I want you to do is I want you to list possible jobs that in normal times, pretend we're not in the middle of this COVID crisis. So let's say it was last summer or last May. What kinds of jobs are available to your students in your area, right? You're teaching high school, most of you probably. So for a typical kid in South Carolina, a high school student, what kind of jobs are available in normal times? And Chris, take it from here.
All right, and you don't have to type these in the chat box. We're actually going to do something slightly different with these. I'm going to ask you to go to a website called menti.com, and that's www.menti.com. You can also see it on my screen. It's really small at the top there. I'm about to expand that and make it a little bit bigger. And when you go there, it's going to ask for a code. It's one of these places that asks for a code. You can do this on your phone as well, and the code is 993535. So menti.com. It's also in the chat box, although you can't click on it because I didn't put in the HTTPS stuff. But menti.com, use the code 993535 when you get there, and people are already in. This is great. And yeah, just jobs your students can get. What do they have access to? And then we'll let this run for 60 seconds or so and see what people put in. There we go. This is cool. All right.
Good to see welder. I like that. Babysitting.
And make sure you submit. You can't just type in the word. You got to submit there.
Someone wrote selling drugs.
Yeah.
Farming, medical, customer service, IT. Did see factory jobs. That's good to see.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by that because in Georgia we have issues with that because, well, yeah, I don't know if they're taking this as things they can get in the future or things they can get as a high schooler.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a lot of responses. So I don't know when you want to.
Okay.
Pretty cool. All right. Fast food clearly sitting at the the head of the table there. Retail and babysitting.
Landscaping, and I knew fast food was going to be everyone's or many people's number one. Okay, so there's quite a few answers there, but again, you can see the big ones: landscaping, fast food, retail, babysitting. Yeah, okay, lawn care, and some of them are sort of the same. Landscaping and lawn care, that's the same thing over there. We got fast food worker. All right, so Chris, if you want to go back to my screen, there we go.
I'm just going to put it up on mine, and let me know when you want to switch it because that'll be easier than going back and forth.
Okay. So, again, I'm thinking of where I live, where Chris lives. My daughter she just graduated high school and, she wanted to get a job. And we talked about the options of what she could do. And it really came down to fast food, babysitting, and retail in my area. And it's a, area with a lot of businesses. She didn't have a whole lot of options, especially now. The difference between a 15, 16, 17-year-old student here and what's happening in Germany is quite stark. And in the next slide, Chris, if you could pull up the next slide, this is an actual list of some of the German vocational programs that students can apply to get into at the age of 15 to 16. The actual full list is almost 350 different occupations where students sit down with their parent and a guidance counselor kind of person, and they actually pick, all right, this is what I want to do possibly, right? And you can see there's many, 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 many different vocations to pick from. And what we're going to have you do is pick your top 3, right? So you're going to go through and think, if I'm 15, 16 years old, what can I possibly do with the rest of my life where I'm going to be trained to do it? So, Chris, you want to talk about the 2-screen thing here and how they're going to work?
You should be, there's a little button that pops up on, you should still be on your Menti, MENTI. If you weren't on that, it's menti.com. And then the code is 993535. But on there, mine popped up with a little button that said go to the next slide. So do that. And then you might have to, if you're on a computer, you may have to go back and forth between the Zoom and the Menti. But basically, yeah, looking at this list, try to think through, like, if you were actually going to pick 3 of these things to consider, what might you do? And take a look at all of them. There's some cool stuff in that last column there. Ventor.
Yeah, I'd do that.
I originally wanted to have you just be able to select these, but I couldn't enter all of these options into the Menti. So try to spell them as correctly as possible.
Some of these are making me rethink my career choice.
Yeah.
I want to go be a Harvard.
Also, Menti only allows you to do 25 characters, so you're not going to be able to enter specialist for protection and safety ice cream specialist.
Chris, did you see that question that just came up about teaching in Germany?
Oh, I closed my chat box temporarily.
All right, I will answer that. So the question came from a teacher saying, are there no career options to be teachers? These career options are vocational career options. So teaching would be a different, in Germany, they have different schools in high school, basically. So students that are going to be teachers would be going to a different school and wouldn't be making the choice off of this list. So think of this as a vocational program at your school. Your school might have students that are going off to college to be teachers, but they also might have students that are in the vocational program going to learn how to be a welder. So that's why you don't see teachers on that list. Someone said it was hard to pick 3. Chris, now I can see the chat. Okay, so our list is growing. And as you're going and answering these, I'll tell you a couple of quick stories. I mentioned earlier that you can apply to go on a study tour to Germany with the Transatlantic Outreach Program. One of the highlights of those trips is that you go to schools, and oftentimes there are these vocational schools. And I mentioned last time how I went to a school that was teaching students how to be construction workers and mechanics and plumbers. Another trip I took, we went to a school where it was a school that was, their specialty was being, like they were jewelers and working with gems and watchmakers. So all of the students were learning how to make watches and jewelry, and sort of their final exam, final product was a watch. So by the end of the year, each student had to make their own watch, which totally blew my mind. I thought that was really interesting. And again, kind of a cool skill set to learn at a young age.
And Mike, if I could jump in on my trip, we went to this place in really tip top in North Germany, and it was a plastics factory. And we actually got to talk to some of the students who were there, and they came in and sat down at a table with us. And they said the coolest part of their job was the CEO of the company would talk to them and would say, if you have an idea for how to improve this process, or if you have an idea, bring it to us. And, just because you're 16 doesn't mean you don't have some kind of cool idea. And they really felt like, they were like adults. They were like part of the conversation. And it was cool because that's what they did. They went to school in the morning and then they came there and worked in the afternoon. They were treated more or less like equals by the people that we talked to, at least.
Yeah. So again, you've picked some cool jobs here. So again, imagine if you're 15 years old and you could actually start learning at 15 how to be these things. There's the gemstone one, a brewer, or gem cutter, whatever it might be. So Chris mentioned that the students in these programs, they're going to school probably 2 days a week where they're actually in a classroom like your classrooms. But then the other 3 days a week, they're actually in a factory or a business on the floor learning something with a meister who is training them how to do this particular job. On top of that, they're getting paid while they're doing it. I was interviewed a young man who was, I think, 19, and he was doing the program with T-Mobile, like the big, telecom cell phone company in Germany. And he was telling me he was making enough money that he moved out and he was living on his own, because basically he almost had a full-time job where he's being paid, which was fantastic. And then he came, 2 days a week to learn at school. Okay, so again, I just wanted to highlight here and show you, and maybe you could share when you do this lesson, you can share this with your students and ask them, like, what would you like to do? And compare what they would have to do now to get into these careers versus what they have to do in Germany to get into these careers. All right, Chris, next slide. Okay, some fast facts about the dual vocational training program in Germany. This is a highly popular program. You can see at the top, more than 50% of Germans, throughout the country enter these programs, and this is how they're trained when they're in high school. They can choose from almost 350 different trades, like we just did on the previous slide. Typically, these programs are 2 to 3.5 years long. And as I mentioned, part of the time they're in schools, the other part of the time they're actually in a factory, like this young man here working with that meister there, teaching him how to work that particular drill bit. And as I said, students are paid. And I believe the last bit of information was from 2019. And the average student in one of these programs earns almost $1,100 per month. And that number goes up because there are some highly skilled engineering type jobs where those students get paid more than someone who might be like learning how to be a hairdresser or something like that. One other story I just thought of is the last time I went to Germany was, I think, 2 years ago. And we visited a school that was trying to help and support all the Syrian refugees, and the refugees came from the Middle East and were in Germany all of a sudden. Like, they were trying to teach those students who didn't have much German skills and things they could do. So a lot of them went into like hairdressing and baking and things like that, where they didn't need a lot of language skills initially. So it was kind of interesting to see the German response to that refugee crisis through their educational VOTEC program, which I think has been pretty successful with that group. All right, next slide, Chris. Okay, so what we're going to share with you is just a 4-minute clip out of this 9-minute video that is focused on the BMW factory and the apprenticeship program in South Carolina and how it's working. So hit that, Chris.
Economist Bob Lerman, who tagged along with us in South Carolina, has been studying youth unemployment for decades. Right now, even college grads under age 25 have a 50% chance of being or underemployed. And the long-term prospects are much worse for the 1/3 of young Americans without any college at all. Apprenticeships, Lerman thinks, provide a ray of hope.
It's the most promising thing I've seen for the broad problem of youth that are not succeeding in a 4-year college.
We talk all the time about people without jobs and jobs without people.
Brad Neese runs Apprenticeship Carolina, a state-funded office founded in 2007 that helps employers set up registered apprenticeship programs. To sweeten the pot, South Carolina offers a $1,000 per year tax credit per apprentice. But the companies bear most of the educational and training costs, which can run well over $50,000 a head.
We've built this thing from 777 apprentices to over 10,000 now. When we started it, we only had 90 companies. We now have 650 today. The reason we're growing is because the businesses are saying we need a pipeline of talent. We need to grow our own. We can no longer find talent in the open market.
Even as U.S. unemployment has remained stubbornly high, employers, especially in manufacturing, complain they can't find enough qualified workers. So Apprenticeship South Carolina helps tailor the state technical college curriculum to each employer's needs, like this mechatronics program at Greenville Tech, used by BMW and others.
Do you worry at all that with industry so specifically running the show, it's somehow compromising the educational mission?
So what if they're not, reading Shakespeare? These guys want to work with their hands. They want to get into the theoretical knowledge, not of the iambic pentameter. They want to get into the theoretical knowledge of Ohm's law.
I'm more of a hands-on person, not a sitting in the desk writing and looking at a computer screen.
Brandon Richards is an apprentice at United Tool and Mold in Easley, which supplies BMW and other German companies, has modeled its new apprenticeship program on theirs.
It starts out with a paid associate's degree, and we also pay for their time while they sit in the class. If their hourly rate at the shop is $10 an hour, then they're going to make that $10 an hour while they're sitting in school.
A third-generation tool and die maker, production manager Jeremy Arnett is a true believer in apprenticeships. When he started here 16 years ago,
I didn't know the difference between a drill and a reamer and an end mill. I see myself and those young kids in all they want's an opportunity, but don't have the skill sets.
But why? If apprenticeships are booming in the Palmetto State, are they lagging everywhere else? Down 40% nationwide in the last 5 years.
I think a lot of it has to do with really the mindset. Are you willing to think long-term and invest on the front end, because you're going to have the return on investment through the career of a successful and productive employee? It's just you have an upfront cost.
Bob Lerman suggests another reason.
Unless you allow everybody to do the same thing.
Go to college, that is.
Yes, go to college. You are reducing equality. And people are very uncomfortable saying that my child will go to college, but your child might not go to college. And then there are people who don't even start college. And what are their options? They're not very good.
So perhaps apprenticeship should be one of them.
And Paul has more with BMW.
All right, so I saw some really great questions come up as this was playing. And Chris, you can go to the next slide if you would.
Do you want to just share your screen again so you can?
There's only 2 more slides, that's fine.
Okay, all right, I'll just keep going then. Okay.
Yeah, stop right there. So one of the questions that came up was who pays the salaries and where does that come from? In Germany, it's the actual businesses that are paying for the workers, for the students, because they, the businesses want these students to come work for them eventually, so that they're paying them, and sort of it's an attractive way to get people there. And this slide really breaks down who is kind of responsible for what in Germany, and I think this is where things get a little off the rails in our country and why these programs aren't as popular here as they are in Germany. You can see the federal government on the left has a role. They're standardizing exams and teacher training and vocational education, sort of the standards of these things. The state governments, and there's 16 states in Germany or landers, and they're the ones that are actually responsible for education in each of their states, right? So the federal government has some requirements, but the state governments have the power to actually put curriculum in and things like that. The businesses, they're the ones that are selecting the students, they're conducting the training, they're working with schools and government to fill open positions. And again, they want workers because they need them, right? And then the chambers of commerce, which, we have chambers of commerce here, but they're not really, at least in Georgia anyway, they're not really working with schools that often. Whereas in Germany, they have a lot of connectivity with German schools and these businesses, and they're, ensuring quality assurance, they're representing the company's needs, they're advising companies and trainees, and they actually issue regulations and certificates. So when you're a student and you're done, and you're past your certification process, you're actually getting certified by the Chamber of Commerce, right? And that, again, that's where we're kind of disconnected here in the United States. I think there's many, many, many advantages for students, for businesses, for everybody. The disadvantage, and that was one of the questions in my second slide today, the disadvantages is what that one of the last gentlemen just said in that video, the guy Werner from BMW. It's really expensive. Like for BMW to train workers, it costs a lot of money. So sometimes here, businesses are reluctant to invest all this money into these students who might, upon graduation, just walk and say, well, I don't want to work with you anyway. And they've sort of wasted all that money. So the big disadvantage is it's super duper expensive to actually do this. If we want to go one more slide, Chris. So with this, again, you've probably picked up on it, but in South Carolina, these students are taking these courses. They're at tech school, so it would really be after you graduate high school. That's where we're starting these in many cases, is when the students are 18, 19 years old. Where the German model, they're doing it when the kids are 15 or 16. One of the greatest quotes I've ever heard of any educational person I've ever spoken with, and the first time I went to Germany on a study tour, where an expert from one of the states was talking about this exact program. And he said, when German students graduate high school, when German vocational students graduate high school, they're ready to be workers. When French students graduate high school, they're ready to be students. So I was like, oh, man, yeah, because you know, in Germany, they're training these kids to actually have careers and be workers, and they're ready to go that next day. Where in many other countries, we're really training kids to be students and not really workers yet. And that was one of the quotes that came up in the video. The gentleman said, you know, there's people without jobs and jobs without people. So there's that disconnect. And this program tries to sort of bring that together so there's no longer a disconnect, where students leaving school have jobs and businesses can actually hire workers that they need at their factory that are ready to go like the next day, okay? So this extension task for this particular lesson, you know, it gets into talking about how can we as a society prepare our youth to join the workforce. And I realize this is a big, you know, big ask, but if you're a teacher in a school that doesn't really offer any vocational programs, you might want to start asking why. I taught at a school where we had 0 vocational programs for our students, and we assumed every kid was going to go to college. And I once had a student ask me point blank, Mr. Raymer, I'm not college material. What can I do? I didn't have an answer for him, and I felt really horrible about it. I wish we would have had vocational programs, because this kid would have been perfect for this kind of program. So start asking people in your community, do you have vocational programs? Are we looking to partner with businesses? And you might be the thing that gets this rolling. And again, there is a really great track record in South Carolina of this happening already in many places. So there is that. You can kind of point to the BMW apprenticeship model and you know, maybe get a discussion going where this might be more common. All right, Chris, next slide. All right, so my advice for this particular part of the activity, use the top materials. These lessons, again, these are 2 of, I think there's like 18, 20 lessons altogether. I think 6 of them are economics only, but if you haven't looked at these lessons, give them a look, because there's great material in there. You know, when I was teaching, I would find lessons and kind of pick parts here and there. So you might not want the entire lesson, but there might be a great activity or talking point you could pull out and use with your students. So please look them over. Again, apply for a study tour. Someone asked on the chat if you're going to do the BMW presentation again. Amanda said no, but it's taped. So if you want to see the thing I did 2 weeks ago, half of it was talking about these study tours that you can apply for. Again, there's no financial charge to you. They take roughly a summer over 2 weeks. All businesses, you'll get into schools and you'll meet all that kind of stuff. It's a great opportunity. All right, last slide, Chris. So more slides. These are, I'm going to send presentation to Amanda, push it out to all of you. 3 important links. The first one, the Transatlantic program. There, and this is where you can read the program if you haven't done it already. Also, you'll find all of these. There's a tab for teachers for social studies. You click on that, and then there's a list of the materials, and you'll find all the lessons there. You can also share this with your STEM teaching friends, because there's a STEM section now. The second one is an article. It's an overview of vocational training in Germany. And then the third one is a really great article that a gentleman who went on a transatlantic outreach program trip, he was an educator, he went on a trip with them, came back in 2014 and wrote this really good article about the program and what they're doing right in Germany and what we can learn from it. So with that, I've got time for a couple questions, and then Amanda, she's got to do a couple things with you. So do we have any final questions before we move on? And I want to thank Amanda and Jim again for having me share time with teachers. We really enjoy what we're doing here with you guys. Thank you. And it's great that you're offering these summer opportunities for teachers. Really well done. I applaud you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you too. Really appreciate your participating in all this, and really Amanda and Chandler are the ones who do, and certainly Rhonda too, in our office do all the hard work for this. So thank you to them.
Mike and Chris, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing these phenomenal resources. I know that when I, hopefully, fingers crossed, go back into my classroom when it's safe in the fall or the spring or whenever that is, that this has certainly given me an opportunity to figure out how I can teach trade in a different way that is more relevant to my students, because they love this information. So this is something that can definitely be easily transferable to a classroom, and something that's online too. So thank you guys so much. For all of you who participated today, thank you guys for coming on, and also thank you for being flexible, because we did have to make a little last minute adjustment. But of course, we will continue to offer the makeup webinar that was supposed to be scheduled for today, July the 21st. So be on the lookout for that. I've also placed in the chat box a link to our evaluation form. Just as a reminder for those of you who may have logged on a little bit late today, this webinar, of course, your attendance in it qualifies you for the incentive for participating in 5 of the live webinars that we're doing during the summer series. So during the summer, we're offering 10 different options. And if you attend 5 live webinars and complete the evaluation, you're eligible for that $100 incentive, because as economists, we know that incentives matter, right? So thank you guys for your continued commitment to your students and for your professional development. I will follow up with an email with Mike and Chris's. It says my internet connection is unstable. I hope you guys can still hear me. I will follow up with you guys with an email that has the information they have shared with me, along with their websites that they shared today. So just another huge thank you to Mike and Chris for this information, and for continuing to work on, okay, good, you can still hear, for continuing to work on relevant, timely lessons for our students, both in South Carolina and throughout the country. So we'll stay on here for just a minute or two longer. If you guys have any questions, make sure you fill out the evaluation, and we hope to see you guys again in our next webinar, which will be on Tuesday at 10 a.m., taking the EEC out of economics, focusing a little bit more on the elementary/middle economics strands with Marcia Masters from the Arkansas Council on Economic Education. You're in for another treat.
Amanda, could I have one thing? Mark Williams, who was supposed to give this brief today and serves on our board, he was founded Strategic Development Group. He's brought millions and millions of dollars worth of companies. He's placed them in various places around the world. So when you talk about why does a company locate to a particular site, it's almost like a comparative advantage in positioning between various countries. This is positioning yourself in maybe South Carolina versus Connecticut. And so you want to use your resources, your positive resources, in a good way. It also shows you the flow of why things happen the way they do. Some things you can make happen, some things you just need to sort of take advantage of what you have to offer. So it's a really good, he does very good presentations. I hope you're able to see that. And I'm sorry he had to shift.
Yes, and we have a few questions in the chat box. So I know that you guys are in the works of completing your evaluations. If you have not completed the part where it asks which webinar you attended, if you'll click the July the 21st one with today's topic, but if you've already completed that, no worries. At the end of this, I will sort them all and it'll work out.
All right, thank you.
No worries. Thank you guys, and I'll go ahead and sign off, and I will also share the link to the evaluation one more time for those of you who did not receive it. Thanks again.